Hey everybody, my name's Josh. A little while ago, a few of you asked for a behind the scenes video on how I made a Protopie prototype. So today I'm going to walk you through how I did that, show you a little bit of the nuts and bolts. So this is the prototype that I shared. You can see that we have a waveform. This is the entire podcast, and this is a clip of the podcast with a beginning timestamp, end timestamp that adjusts as you move it, and then a total length that is reflected on top. So I was trying to learn if I wanted to be able to manipulate the entire waveform, or if it was just about the clip in the clip end and beginning point. So that's something that I was trying to understand. So seeing the the timestamp reflected on the way as I play with it, that was very important for what I wanted to do. So how did I do that? I'll show you that. So this is how I ended up doing this inside of Protopie. I have a preview card up here, which we don't need to pay too much attention to yet. That is the result. We're going to start by looking at the waveform manipulator. So one of the things I wanted to do here is I wanted to understand, did I want to manipulate the actual waveform, or did I want to manipulate the clip, or both? And sometimes if you manipulate both of those things, it becomes an actually pretty fiddly UI, and I didn't want that. So I wanted it to be as simple as possible. That said, one of the other questions I had was, what is the right level of granularity? If you have a podcast that is an hour and a half long, how are you going to get it to be that precise? So that was an important question I had. There's also a piece of how much data do we need to show to them, and when do they need to see that data? So those are all questions that I was trying to answer with this. So I took everything and I put it inside of a waveform to start. And so I have a waveform here. I have the start control and the end control. And these images are just actually imported directly from Sketch. I think I was coming from Sketch in this case. So it's kind of clunky that it came over as an image, but it works. That's not the thing I'm trying to get right now. So, but if I look at the start control, what did I do here? So what you do is you take the start control and you add a condition to watch as it's being dragged. In that condition, if you can see in these faint letters here, it's going to track the X position of that as we go. I did the same thing on an end control, so that we have, so both of those things have the beginning and end position, and they're tracked along this horizontal axis. So for the start control, if you then dig in, now we have the ability for it to be dragged, and as it's dragged, it'll output the position of that control. One of the questions I also had was, how do we want to render that podcast? And one of the things that came up, there was a constraint. I found a constraint. I didn't know how to work around this, but ended up being a happy constraint, is the idea here that what we're going to do is I can track the position of that handle, but I didn't know how to map it to the length of audio. So what I ended up doing is every second of the waveform representation that we see here is mapped to 1 second of audio. So a pixel in the waveform representation is 1 second of audio. That really helped me to be able to make a good prototype, but it ended up being pretty good proxy for what we're going to end up building. So we're going to start with that, and if you can see this, if I were to say that the screen was about 375 pixels wide and starts at 15 pixels over here, I have about 360 pixels of waveform, and so at 1 second per pixel, that allows me to get pretty precise with selecting, but it also gives me probably 6 minutes of audio to select from. So that seemed like a pretty good balance. We may end up tweaking that in the future, but it gives me a good balance for where to start as far as how we represent these things. Now, the next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to look at actually getting the feedback as I was playing to show me exactly where I was, what piece of content I was selecting, or where the start time was. So you can see here, don't pay too much attention because this is actually placeholder text. So rather than static text, what we have here is it's detecting the text. And so it's detecting the text and it's rendering that on the fly. and you can do that through a formula. The formulas I found not to be the absolute most intuitive thing, but I'm not really good at this type of thing in formulas, and they did have enough documentation to get me through it to create a few of these formulas to build what I want. And I felt like they had actually a pretty decent amount of power, so I felt kind of proud of myself. What this is saying, I'll just say it real quickly, that a floor just kind of rounds things down, so we're measuring where the start control is, and then I'm dividing it by 60. So in this case, they're doing that because that maps to a minute, right? So every 60 seconds in a minute. And if it's under a minute, it just won't show that type of thing. So it'll show 0 minutes. So that's the floor. It's always rounding down. So that was actually a really helpful command that they had. So let's be, in this case, let's call it 2 minutes, and then I'll do that again. And then it has this remainder function. So anything above that or left over will be represented as seconds. So you have to kind of get in and play with these types of things yourself, but I thought it worked pretty well. So that's how you kind of slide and do those types of things. I ended up having a selection area that did something as well. So it's detecting, and you can see it's detecting where to go from, but it's also detecting the size. And so it's changing its position, its X position, but it's also changing the width based on the end control. Some of the limitations here that I found are that if I go negative, so the end control goes past the beginning control, math gets weird. But I think that's also was helpful for me in a prototype scenario to say that I probably want to limit that in the production app as well. So that was actually quite helpful. So lastly, if I come up into this card, this is the output, and I have this one labeled as clipped length. So I did something similar here. Rather than rendering static text, it is rendering a formula based on the beginning clip and the end clip subtracting each other. So what that looks like here is you have a floor, again, rounding things down. So you take the end control, 3 minutes and 10 seconds in this example, minus the start control, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Those are, again, are absolute numbers of pixels. So you take those, so let's say that rounds us out with 147 pixels, and then you divide that by 60, so you'd be left with 2 minutes. So I have 2, and then we round that down with floor, and so that's 2 minutes. And then for the seconds, we would have to do the same thing. So I had another floor where you took the end control, start control, and then you took the remainder of dividing it by 60. And then that's how many seconds you have. So this has all got a little bit technical, but honestly, it took me 2 hours or 3 hours to kind of dig in and build this type of prototype, and it helped me answer really important questions as far as what type of data do I need to output, where do I need to output that data. What you don't see here is some of the other things I played with. This also allowed me to have the waveform scroll independently of the clips, so I thought maybe like the clip would sit fixed on the screen, and that you'd be more kind of zooming the wavelength. That got really crazy, and I didn't want to do that. So this felt like kind of the nicest balance, and it was able for me to see how it was kind of previewing a clip. It felt like now this clip card or the preview card on the top now feels like a thing that I'm actually making, because as I'm sliding, it's updating live values. So that's something that I would not have been able to get through any sort of other prototyping tool or ones that I've used recently. So I was pretty happy with Protopie. Thanks everybody for the suggestions on Protopie, and I hope this was a useful video.